guys, today we'll be going over how to navigate the Blender interface. Whenever you start Blender, you will see this splash screen like this that has all of your recent files and new files you can make, along with the open button to open any of your files. Recent files shows all the files you've opened in the past bit. If you have not used Blender before, this will obviously be empty. But right now we're just gonna click on General, left click on General to open a new 3D project. Right now, you spawn in a scene with a default cube, a camera, and a light. I'll just show you how to navigate around the viewport first by moving around. So first, to scroll in on an object, you use your mouse, scrolling, like that. But as you can see, that's blocky. So if you want something a little less blocky, more smooth, hold down Control, click on your mouse button, and drag your mouse like that. Nice and smooth. And then to pan your movement around, instead of just scrolling up and down, hold down middle mouse and drag your mouse around. This is called orbiting, and it is a very useful way to navigate the viewport. Then, if you want to have that a little more controlled, hold down Shift and drag the same way, like that. I find hearty use of all of those is nice. If you want to just have a smooth zoom up on your object, just press period on the number pad, and then you have your object highlighted. And then if you want to lock your view to an axis, instead of just having to eye it like that, you can press the number pad keys 1, 3, and 7 to lock that to the axis. You can also use these up here and such. And now to select objects, use your left mouse, hover over the object and use left mouse. So clicking on the camera, left mouse, clicking on the cube, left mouse to select it. And then when you select it, if you want to say, I want to move my camera closer to the cube, you can press G on your keyboard and then use your mouse to move it. If you want it to be a little more snapped to the axis, you can press G, either Y, that moves it in the Y axis, GX moves it on the X axis, or GZ moves it on the Z axis. And then say you wanted to rotate it, you press R and use your mouse to rotate it like that. And again, same thing if you want to snap it to an axis. R, Y to rotate it on the Y axis. R, X to rotate it on the X axis. R, Z to rotate it on the Z axis. And then then click on the cube. This is all applies for the cube, so G on the cube, Y, X, Z goes the same for rotating, Y, X, Z. But I know for cameras it doesn't really work, but so click on the cube, and then if you wanted to make it larger or smaller, you press S. Right now, it scales it in all of the sizes, all of the axes, so over here, you can see this is the scale, so it says scale X, scale Y, and scale Z. So if you press S over here, you can see those numbers increase all at the same time. But if you wanted it just to grow longer on the y-axis, scale y. And then if you look at the numbers, it's only getting larger on the y-axis, but you can also see that effect in the viewport too. Goes for the same on all the other axes, scale x, scale z. And then if you're not a hotkeys person, over here on this little bar, you can use move, click on that. You can drag in the selected axis. Same for rotating. Rotate Y, rotate Z, rotate X. This little guy around here is just the normal rotate. Then scale. This does the scaling of all sizes. This one is just the Z, this one the X, and this one the Y. If you're wondering what this fourth one down here is, it is all three at the same time. So if you just do that, it can kind of get crazy. I personally think all of these can get crazy, so that is why I just use the hotkeys. But you can use any of these if you want. The next thing is deleting and adding objects. So to delete an object, there are many ways to do it. I usually just press delete on my keyboard, and that just makes it disappear and delete it from the scene. As you can see up here, this is just an overview of your scene, and you can see the cube is no longer here. Press Control Z to undo that action. Another way to delete an object is press X, delete, and then it's gone, as you can see. Control Z, and then you can add objects. You can either do that by going up here and pressing Add Mesh Cube. There is another cube that, like this one used to be. You can delete that. Or you can do Shift A Mesh Cube. And then you can Control Z to make that leave. Then you have the duplicate command, Shift D. And it automatically is in grab mode. See, so if I do Control Z, Shift D, if I just move my mouse, it moves with it. So Control Z, Shift D, and then you can snap it to any of the axes. So Y, X, Z. You can snap it like that. Right click to cancel that and just leave it like it is. I'm gonna move it over a little. And now you can see we have two cubes of the exact same kind. It just duplicates the mesh. And then of course, when you press Shift A, there are many different options, but I'm not gonna go into all of these today. And then if you want to, make it a weirder shape, you can just press Tab. This is edit mode. You can only bring one at a time if you just have that item selected, but by holding down Shift and selecting on the object with left mouse, you can press Tab and then have both of them in. As usual, it is in your vertex mode, but you can press 2 or 3 to bring it into face mode is number 3. Edge mode is number 2. You can grab edges, and then 1 is vertices. You can grab vertices. I'm not going to go into this too much because the edit mode section is a wide tutorial that I will not go into right now, but you can keep your eyes out for one soon. But the shift click command can apply for anything. So if I wanted the camera and the light, you can just do shift click. If I wanted all of them selected, you could do that. But another command for all of them selected is just pressing A. Then you can grab them all or scale them all or rotate them all. So that's how you do the selecting all of them. If you go up here, you can see these little renditions of a little circle. You can click, it spawns in viewport shading solid mode, which we're in right now. That's how it usually is whenever you open any project. But there are more. I like to have mine in viewport shading. And viewport shading is if you press 0, it goes to the camera's view. And the camera's view is what's going to render when you're exporting this as an image. This is what you're going to see. So render mode up here is what you will see. This is just the entire world. If you're rendering the entire world, this is what you'd see. But if you press 0 in render mode, this is exactly what will be rendered as an image for your if you press render up here. So if you press render up here, render image, you can see that's the camera view. So this is the rendered view, and then there is material view next to it. Right now, nothing's happening because our cubes, they don't have materials. To add a material, you go down to this little beach ball material properties tab on this. And as you can see in all of your materials, this one just has material. On surface, you can click on base color and mess with the color. As you can see, it's editing this one too because this one shares a material. If you want to make a new material, so this one has a different one, press the add a new material, new, and as you can see, that doesn't do anything. Like, this should be blue, but this isn't blue because the material isn't assigned to it yet. So if you want to assign this one, tab, press A, so everything is selected, and then down here you can see that this has appeared. Press assign. So now if you press tab again, you can see that our cubes are 2 different colors. And there are so many options in the materials tab, but the ones you should know are base color. It decides what the color of it is, so let's go with a green. I like green. Then you have metallic, which makes it how much does it look like a metal. That one really only works like that, but you can see now it's shiny, like a metal. So 1 makes it look like the most metal, 0 makes it look like it's not a metal. Then there's roughness, which would sound like how bumpy it is, but actually it is how the light reacts to it. So if you drag this all the way up, you can see there's hardly any reflection. But then if you drag this all the way to 0, you can see that little dot has formed. That is the roughness messing with the light. See, so if you drag this close to it, if you drag it close, you can see it's like a very reflective substance. So that's what roughness does to an object. If you drag it all the way up again, you can see it isn't as reflective, and it's more of a like a fabric or like cement. Those are the main things for this. All of these can get hard to deal with. But that's the most of it for materials. And then there's a lot of things on this panel. So, but the most important ones, this is render properties. This shows what render engine you're in. Eevee is a real-time rendering, while Cycles it's higher quality. As you can see, it gets a little glitchy when you go onto it. I use Eevee for most of my projects, but because Eevee is like less taxing on the computer, like your computer power, so I use Eevee most of the time for most of my renders, but that can mess with some more advanced materials if you're going for that. So if your computer can stand it, I highly recommend Cycles. And then the rest of this is just all sorts of settings that you can go into. There's bloom, which can make things glow. It's a lot of what I know. There's just a lot on there. So this is the scene. Then if you go to output properties, this is if you're rendering an animation, which you can play through here. As we can see, we have no animation, but you can play through this and see your animation if you have one. This is the output properties. So this is if you press render animation, which I'm not going to do because it's if you press spacebar, you can play through the animation. As you can see, nothing's happening here, so it'd be a waste of computer power to render this. But this is where you can see how it's going to come out. You can decide which file it's going into by clicking on this. You can decide which file format you want it to go to. If you're doing an animation, I usually do a FFmpeg video, like a movie file, and then if you click that, you can do encoding, and I recommend switching it to MP4. But that's about it for this. Then if you go to this, this is just kind of looking more into this, but I do not use this usually. Scene properties, this can decide whether or not you want gravity, but that's more for like physics. So when you get into physics, this is the world property. So background, these are all nodes that can get pretty advanced. But this one is easy, just color. You can drag this all the way up to make it white. You could mess around with color. Let's do like red. As you can see, it messes with the materials a little. But if you were to press 0 render image, it would render as red instead of gray, as we saw. I like sticking with gray though, so I'll stick with that. And then you can decide your strength of the background and some other factors. Then there is collection, which just messes around with the settings of this collection up here, where all of your items are in. So this one, if you click on an object, this one shows all the properties of your object. So it shows your location of the object. So if you were to drag this, you can mess with those numbers. Rotation does the rotation, and then scale, it does the scale. You can also toggle the visibility of it, so whether or not you can see it in render. So if you don't click on that and then render image, it won't be there in the render. If you keep that, if you click on the viewport, you won't be able to see it here, but if you render the image, it will still be there. And then the viewport display kind of goes through that too. Then you have modifiers. Actually, I'll just forgot to unhide it. What? You need, I like having mine visible. So for modifiers, these do all sorts of things. But usually the ones I use most are array. I'm not going to go into detail on this, but array just copies your mesh, and then you can offset them. Whee! It just copies your mesh. So if you're doing like a fence or something, or like a stairway, do one on the Z. Like, yeah. Like a stairway or like a fence, then you can press this X to remove it. I also use bevel, which makes the edges a little more round. You can do amount to make it larger, and then segments to make it smoother. You could also help that. You can, to make it less little, you can see these. You can press right click and then shade smooth. It doesn't really do anything because it's a cube, but if you shift a UV sphere, right click, shade smooth, as you can see, it's now smooth. Delete that. But that's what happens to a beveled cube. There's also many things like the physics or modifying or more generates, even like mirror. You can see this mirrors half of the object. It's different from array in that if you press tab, it does that. So which can look kind of weird, but if you're trying to make something symmetrical, it helps. Those are the ones you'll be using the most, I would think. There's also geometry nodes, which can get fairly complicated. Subdivision surface, which is subdividing, but that's about it for. And then you can always go down here. If you're happy with it, you can press apply, and then it removes it, but there's no undoing it. So now I'm stuck with this little bevel on my cube. And then there's particles, which if you add a particle, as you can see now, stuff is falling out from our cube. I'm not going to go deep into particle systems because that can get wacky and hard on the computer very quick, so you can just press minus to delete that. Now there's physics. All of these physics tutorial for another day, but there's a bunch of physics that are super fun if you ask me. Object constraints, it's kind of like modifiers, but just like seeing, attaching the object to stuff and other things. Then we have the mesh properties. This is a cube, so it's mesh. But then if you, these are vertex groups that can come in handy later. So if you add that group, it's kind of like materials. If you press tab, let's say we want this corner to be in a vertex group, you can assign it to a vertex group. And then that is now part of a vertex group. We can just minus that. Material properties, we've already went over that. But that's about it for the properties over here. As I said earlier, this is the timeline. So if you had an animation, press spacebar. If you had an animation, this would play through all your keyframes, but we do not have an animation, so it's just boring old cubes sitting there. Animation tutorial for another day, because animation can get either easy or complicated. But that's about it for this tutorial. Thank you very much for watching.